Now that I've moved to Barbados with my parents, I'm seeing firsthand how the effects of climate change are causing more coastal threats.
That's right, Ethan. With sea level rise and storm surge causing flooding and beach erosion, we could lose even more valuable coastline and beach access.
Yeah, I don't know what I would do if I couldn't enjoy the coast.
You got that right. It's even more important that we protect our coastal heritage in Carlisle Bay. It's part of our UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Oh yeah, our coast isn't just beautiful, it has so much cultural and historical value, but is the increasing frequency of hurricanes and storms really going to change this?
Spoken like a true Bajan.
Like Ethan and Keisha, we can all value, preserve, and protect our coast for the future. The Coastal Zone Management Unit is working to sustainably manage our coastal spaces by mitigating the impacts of climate change for generations to come through updating the Integrated Coastal Zone Management Plan. From improved management of beach activities to ensuring developers build further back from the shoreline, the CZMU is planning for a safer and more resilient coast. See more from Ethan and Keisha on the CZMU and GIS social media. Play your part to manage and protect our coast, our home, our future. To view the updated ICZM plan and learn more, visit coastal.gov.bb/ICZM Plan.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our penultimate public inquiry meeting for the draft Integrated Coastal Zone Management Plan. My name is Alison Wiggins, and I will be taking you through the proceedings of this evening. Let me introduce the persons at the meeting this evening. I'd like to introduce first the chairman of the public inquiry, who is overseeing the discussions over the last month or so. Her name is Dr. Yolanda Aline, who is no stranger to development planning, environmental planning in Barbados. The team from the Coastal Zone Management Unit is made out of the director, who is Dr. Leo Brewster, the deputy director, Antonia Rowe, the project manager, Ricardo Arthur, the coastal planner, Fabian Hines, the coastal information systems manager, Ramon Roach, and the technical officer, who is Shamari Cave. Then the team from our consultants is headed by the director of IH Cantabria, Raul Medina Santa Maria, who's ably assisted by the team leader for this particular consultancy, Jonathan McHugh, as well as Maria Marino. And then the team is supported by Heather Barker as well. Let me take you through today's proceedings. We will have opening remarks by the chairman of the chairperson of the public inquiry, and introduction to the plan by Dr. Brewster. Then we'll have a discussion and presentation by the team leader for the consultants, Jonathan McHugh, and our project manager, Ricardo Arthur. After that, we open the floor to you so that you have the opportunity to ask your questions and make your comments on the contents of the plan. And our closing remarks will be given by the Deputy Director, Antonia Rowe. At this point in time, let me introduce the chairperson of the public inquiry, Dr. Yolanda Aline, who will give her opening remarks. Dr. Aline.
Yes. Good evening, everyone. My name is Yolanda Aline, as Alison just said, and I want to join her in welcoming you to this, our 7th public consultation for the Integrated Coastal Zone Management Plan. We are looking at Sub-Area 7 from Batt's Rock to Needham's Point. We live here, and all of us know that the area on either side of our shoreline, the land side and the water side, are zones of intense activity. On the landward side, it is estimated that approximately 50% of our population and 95% of our tourism-related infrastructure is concentrated in or near the area which we traditionally know as the coastal zone. Along with many of our institutions, our health, education, social services, also our power plants and all the infrastructure that goes along with that. That is a lot of activity on the landward side. And on the seaward side, we also have many things taking place: cargo shipping, leisure craft, fishing, diving, swimming. And there's potential for so much more. So it's very difficult to manage our coastal areas in an island this size without recognizing the significant impacts of land-based activities from the upper reaches of our watershed, all the way through to the coastline and into our marine areas. Also, integrated coastal zone management is essential for Barbados, as healthy oceans and coastal areas are vital to our economic future as we push forward with a lot of blue economy initiatives. This draft Barbados Integrated Coastal Zone Management Plan is a timely intervention in the context of increasing climate and disaster risk, combined with more coastal development and intense use of our marine areas. Now is the time for all of us as residents to become involved in the integrated and coordinated management of our coastal areas. We, the general public, key stakeholders, we are all custodians of our coast, and this consultation process is an opportunity for everyone to get involved. As chairperson, my role is going to be important in listening to your inputs carefully. And at the end of all the consultations, I will make recommendations on how the plan may be strengthened for us to use it as an essential management and decision-making tool. I hope that many of you have had a chance to read the plan, but if you haven't, this evening is important for you to listen, also you to listen very carefully to the proposed policy tools and guidelines for coastal areas management and give your feedback to support what you hear, improve it, provide alternatives to what has been put forward in the draft plan so that we can strengthen it for all of our good. So I encourage you to listen carefully, take notes, clear your thoughts, and during the question and answer segment, make your presentations and share your constructive viewpoints on how you think we can make this a very meaningful management tool. We look forward to a very productive and meaningful interaction this evening. And I thank you very much, and I welcome you again to this discussion on Sub-Area 7 from Batt's Rock to Needham's Point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aline. Now, as Dr. Aline mentioned, this is Sub-Area 7, Batt's Rock to Needham's Point. Now, this is probably the most, the area with the most intensive use around the entire island. It is where the majority of our population live. It is where the majority of our population work, and probably where the majority of our population recreate as well. So we have some wonderful features in this sub-area. We have the beaches. We have from Paradise Beach, Brandon's Beach, Brighton, Browns Beach, and Pebbles Beach. And it also encompasses Bridgetown and its garrisons, which is the World Heritage Site as well. We have the Parliament, we have government headquarters, and we have our reefs, our bank reefs and our fringing reefs. We have fishing, we have tourism and recreation, and we have the Carlisle Bay Marine Park. So you can see there's intensive use in this area, both onshore and offshore. And I must also mention we have the port. So you see that it's important we also look at this coastline and look at the policies and guidelines of how we use our resources in this coastline. At this point in time, let me introduce the Director of the Coastal Zone Management Unit, Dr. Leo Brewster, who is going to give us an introduction to the plan. Dr. Brewster.
Thanks a lot, Allison. Hoping everyone can see the screen.
Yes, we can.
Good. Okay. Just as a point of clarification, we're in sub-area 7, so we're going from Batt's Rock to Needham's Point, the second shortest section of the shoreline. Remember that, not Needham's Point, to Pier Head. Yeah, to Pier Head. I think that's it. Because sub-area 8 goes from the Pier Head to Needham's Point. Oh, South Point. It's been a long day. It's been a long day. Okay.
Batt's Rock to Needham's Point.
Batt's Rock to Needham's Point. You are correct. That's right. That's right. That's right. I'm here today to once again give a quick introduction into the plan and to provide some level of understanding as to how we got where we are and where we're going. So just for a quick background, The first plan that we ever did was done in 1995, done by Delcan and Associates, where we looked at the West and South Coast predominantly, building on the work that we had done as part of the feasibility and pre-investment studies that were trying to document and characterize much of the coastal infrastructure, some of the water quality analysis that we had done, and most importantly, to look at some of the beach change monitoring that we had been monitoring from 1983 till that point in time. It was a comprehensive report, and it started to set a foundation as to how we should present information. The second plan was done in 1998 for the East Coast study, which in essence stretched from Maycox Bay around the East Coast to South Point. And that provided the most comprehensive information that had ever been done on the East Coast study area, where we looked at reef locations and the associated coastal ecosystems, captured information on coastal engineering structures, some water quality analysis that was done, characterized ecosystem health in a somewhat similar manner to what we had done for the West and South Coast. And once again, looks at the changes in the beaches over time for that area. Now, the thing to note there was that you had a very short window in which to do that, because that project ran from 96 to about 1999. And coming out of that plan, we then looked to see what areas and aspects of work could then be rolled into the coastal infrastructure program that ran from about 2002 to about 2009. The third plan came up in 2021, which is what we're looking at now, and that provides a comprehensive compilation of data that was accumulated through the Coastal Risk Assessment and Management Project. And what it looked at was how we could then start to try to incorporate climate change, adaptation, and disaster risk reduction into the integrated coastal zone management process for Barbados. Now, some may ask why you need to update the plan, but the reality is that because the global climate is changing, we've seen the results from impacts on different sort of hazards affecting the shoreline over time. We have to give consideration to new approaches to protect the natural assets for the benefit of our coastal communities, and in order to achieve economic prosperity in the future, some of the core foundation elements of a blue economy strategy. And we have to also look at modern coastal management delivery models that are applicable for Barbados. Now, we've been committed to adopting a new strategy in order to better implement climate change and disaster risk resiliency into the coastal zone management process, in order to place emphasis on adaptation strategies that are suitable for our environment. But what must be remembered is that as we're looking to implement risk resiliency within an integrated coastal zone management framework, it is not a simple task. The key differences between the two plans, the 1998 plan, which is very comprehensive, and this current plan that we have, is that in 1998, we had 3 volumes. We had the policy framework document, the Caribbean Coast or the West and South Coast Plan, and the Atlantic Coast or the East Coast Plan. We made significant advances in 1998 into the coastal zone management process and looked at tangible achievements in coastal erosion control, coastal resources conservation, and institutional strengthening and capacity building. We also looked in 98 to develop guidance for the management of coastal uses, the development and regulation along the coastline that can take place, and how activities within the original plan and policy framework could be addressed. We focused also on the integrated role and function of all agencies involved in coastal management, and looked intensively at institutional strengthening for the coastal zone management and its expanded mandate. In this 2020 plan, we have 2 volumes instead of 3. We've looked to see how we can adopt integrated disaster risk management and climate change approaches towards supporting effective coastal planning and incorporating the latest results from our recent study, the Coastal Risk Assessment and Management Project, and the supporting tool which we developed called the National Coastal Risk Information Planning Platform, to provide information as scientific foundations to assist us in our planning evaluations and coastal management strategies rolling forward. We focus also on improving the capacity of the Coastal Zone Management Unit to integrate the climate change considerations into the process of coastal management. And we also try to identify new reporting structures for monitoring and evaluation of the achievements of the plan in the short, medium, and long term. This was something that was lacking from the last plan. The intended impacts of the coastal zone plan are to provide detailed guidance on the management of coastal resources, the use and development and regulations along the coastline. We've looked also at trying to keep the principles of island systems management at the heart of what we do, because we recognize that anything affecting the center of the island can have a near immediate impact in a couple of hours on the coastline. We've also focused on the relationship between protecting coastal resources and reducing climate and disaster related risk, which falls to the Coastal Zone Management Unit as part of its routine remit for evaluating applications. And we've also tried to identify a new boundary for the Coastal Zone Management Area and a new zone of influence that can impact on the Coastal Zone Management Area, whether it be on land or on the open ocean. And we're trying to continue to involve different supporting roles and contributory collaborative partnerships towards defining and refining how the blue economy sector portfolio can be advanced. The cost of doing nothing is pretty straightforward. If you don't have critical infrastructure being protected and maintained, its proximity to the coastline, being as significant as it is, can be impacted by coastal hazards. We need to look to see how potential inundation areas can be impacted by different hazard types and the risk associated with those, and mitigate against those hazards. We have to agree to that at the policy level, and we have to also try to show how the close relationship between this plan and the integrated aspects of it fit in with the newly formed physical development plan for the entire island. And we also have to look at how costings for mitigation measures, while still being determined, can be decisive, because spending money on prevention is better than spending money post-event to deal with damage and repair. The key policy outcomes can be compared in this slide, but I really and truly want to focus on 2020 outcomes. We're looking really in this plan to focus on sustainable socioeconomic development and its achievement. We want to ensure that coastal resources are protected and effectively managed. We want to also ensure that climate and disaster risk adaptive capacities are strengthened across government. We're trying to ensure that the integrated coastal zone management is delivered through a coordinated governance arrangement. So it isn't just like coastal zone management unit, but we have a more coordinated approach through the other agencies in terms of how governance of the shoreline is delivered. We're looking at the capacity for integrated coastal zone management delivery being strengthened across all the relevant sectors as well. And we're looking to ensure that research and understanding, knowledge and outreach is increased, while continuing obviously to ensure that financial resources are sustained to see this carried through in the longer term. The plan itself has 5 principal components. The first component looks at setting the scene for risk resiliency. The second part looks at creating the adaptive pathway through identifying pathway priorities and issues identification, etc., for this process. The third part looks at the national guidance mechanisms that have to be set up for achieving those adaptive pathways. And then the major crux of it is built into the sub-area action briefs for sub-areas 1 to 8 that we've been going over this last month or so, in terms of looking to see how main themes and main issues with strategic objectives can be presented in the action briefs for each sub-area, providing those sub-area descriptions, and look at development planning setbacks and concerns, and what actions will be required into the future, short, medium, and long term, for the effective descriptions of the plan. And Jonathan is going to spend some time on this shortly. And finally, the last component looks at the whole raw implementation of the plan and how the Coastal Zone Management Unit will be rolling out several of the activities proposed in the short, medium, and long term. In summary, what we can say is that government is ramping up its efforts to address coastal vulnerabilities in the face of increasing climate change threats. We're looking through this new policy and plan to improve risk resiliency in the coastal zone management process. We're looking at to see how methods for redefining the boundaries for the coastal zone management area will prove to be effective in terms of setting the uniqueness of this area into a context. We're looking to also look to see how the outputs from the coastal risk management program and the CZMU activities can be generating feasible mitigative measures throughout the life cycle of this coastal plan. We also want to ensure that the island systems management approach still is kept to the heart of what we do. And we want to make sure that the plan uses the latest knowledge and science on climate change and coastal risk to help in terms of developing guidelines, legislation, regulations, and standards that will be of benefit to all of us. At this point, I'll pause and thank you, Alison, and hand it back to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brewster. At this point in time, I will hand it over to Mr. Jonathan McHugh and our project manager, Ricardo Arthur, who would look at the plans, the policies and the plans for this sub-area, as well as the economic considerations. Jonathan, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Alison, and good evening to everybody. We're going to start this evening with just a few very simple, quick online questions. So we're going to, hopefully you're going to use your mouse and provide an overview for us to better understand your appreciation of the coastal zone management plans. Also, how far your knowledge is of the sort of issues related to this sub-area, and also details about yourself. So I will be sharing my screen, but you will also see questions popping up, and I'll talk you through each specific question. So on your screen, you'll be seeing the first question, which is building on Dr. Brewster's initial presentation. We're finding out from you whether you are aware of the details of the existing ICZM plan that was written by Halcrow in 1998. You just give a quick answer to that, either yes, you're aware of it, no, you're not aware of it, or you're uncertain. And I realize this evening that some of you may have been party to some of the other sub-area events, but we are compiling all the answers to give a collective national perspective. So this evening's attendees, when we look at the results, we have 67% are aware of it and 25 unaware. So we've got a good audience of knowledge. Our second question focuses again on Dr. Brewster's assessment of the latest plan, which I'll be developing. And the question is, have you reviewed the draft updated 2020 plan in any detail? And the first option is, I did not know about it. The second option is, yes, I know about it, but I've not reviewed it. Or third option is, I have reviewed it in some detail. So give us your view on one of those three questions. This helps me to sort of craft and articulate some of the details of my presentation. So we've got just over 50% of you tonight have reviewed it in some detail. So we're very pleased that you've done your homework. The third question is relating to your use of the coast. And it doesn't have to be sub-area 7. It could be on a national basis. But let us know if you use the coast primarily for personal recreation, whether you actually live on the coast, or thirdly, whether your business relies on coastal resources and their protection. So give us a view on one of those three. And we've got a predominant 60%, as Alison said in her early presentation, that it's a sub area where people commonly use this for recreation. We've got 30% of you actually living on the coast. And our final question is about you yourselves. And we're looking to try and find out what type of stakeholder you actually are. So let us know if you are, firstly, a member of just the general public, whether you work for the private sector, whether you are representing a public institution, or fourthly, whether you're representing a non-government association. And this evening's audience, it's got quite an interesting mix. There's half of you this evening are public institutions, whereas 40% are general public. I think that's quite a good mix when it comes to the question and answer session. So the following presentation, I'm just going to get you up to speed. It's designed so to make sure we're all on the same page with regard to global and the regional significance of climate change and how this can manifest itself in terms of more localized issues of relevance to all of the sub-areas of Barbados. And for clarity this evening, as has been mentioned, we're covering Batt's Rock, south through Spring Garden, to Brandon's Beach area, southwards towards the port and the industrial area, and then onwards to Bridgetown, the Careenage, Fort Willoughby, the expansive beaches of Carlisle Bay, and on to the Hilton area, close to Needham's Point. And as mentioned in Dr. Aline's presentation earlier, much of the critical infrastructure in Barbados is actually located within this sub-area, though the spatial footprint of these does remain relatively small. The Port of Barbados, as you can see, within sub-area 7, has a footprint of approximately 0.7 square kilometres, with other energy facilities covering far less space. But the issue here is that the cost of protecting coastal assets is, however, often prohibitively high. And in fact, at a more global level, adaptation costs in developing countries are expected to reach up to $300 billion a year by the end of the decade of 2030. So Barbados needs to be mindful of this, and hence future infrastructure development protection related costs in the coming years and decades needs to be carefully managed. So the Coastal Zone Management Unit over the past 20 years have been studying the effects of climate change on the coast, and their work as part of the Coastal Risk Management Programme concludes that a series of key climate related hazards must be managed in an integrated manner if coastal resource management is to be effective and successful. And as you can see on the screen, this includes a range of hazards such as tsunami inundation, hurricanes or tropical storms, storm surges, landslides, coastal erosion, sea level rise, but also assessments associated with oil spills and terrestrial flooding need also to be considered. So when I mention coastal resources, what do we mean? Well, these can include a range of types, including cultural resources that are specific to the Barbados coast. It can include valued seascapes, though more commonly, they're understood as being coastal habitats or ecosystems, such as you can see on the slide, beaches, coral reefs, wetlands, or coastal cliffs and caves. And protecting coastal resources therefore needs to be a national priority. So our next poll question to make sure you're with us is devoted at capturing your view on the importance of coastal resources in this sub-area. So bear in mind that you can scroll down on this screen to 6 different coastal resource types. And what I'd like you to do is score each of those types based on scoring number 1 if you think they're of low importance, or 5 if they're very high importance. And bear that in mind with this specific sub-area in mind. So we'd like you to score beaches and dunes, high or low, coastal cliffs and caves, which are not specific to this sub-area, but from a national perspective, it would be good to get your view. Again, wetlands, swamps and ponds, not specifically predominant in this sub-area, but we need a score from you. Coral reefs and seagrass beds, cultural resources, and also geological formations, broader landscapes and seascapes. So try and consider it from this sub-area's viewpoint, but if it's not relevant to this sub-area, we'd be interested to capture your perspective from a national level. And I think the results will come on the screen so we can sort of gauge people's views. And we're getting high scores for beaches and dunes, understandably, 85%. A little bit more of a mix with regard to coastal cliffs and caves, and that's understandable because of it's not specific to this sub area, but we have a broad spectrum of, but predominantly 3 and above. Wetlands and swamps, again, 3 and above with the mix of the scores. Coral reefs, we're getting 100% scores, and cultural resources, again, 4s and 5s, so both of them predominantly an equal split there. And finally, landscapes and seascapes, again, we're scoring heartily from 3, 4s and 5s. So the poll results themselves are emphatically concluded that there are 2 resource types that are of very high importance, namely beaches and coral reefs. And with regard to the latter, you can see on the slide the extent of patch reef that's present in this sub area, and you can see that in the yellow colour. And it's actually covering a majority of sub area 7 when you see the spread. And this includes areas in close proximity to, as Alison said, the most urbanised and industrial coastal area of Barbados. So local issues that are contributing towards the reduction of health in these habitats needs to be carefully considered. And that can include, amongst other aspects, overexploitation of reef fish, water quality deterioration issues, and also increased sedimentation and suspended sediment levels close to the port, for example. So this brief presentation that I'll come on to demonstrates the approach that we took to revise the boundaries of the coastal zone management area. And it also provides an overview as to how new and innovative setback classifications are being proposed. So the first question that needs posing is, well, why do we need a coastal zone management area? And the simple answer is that there needs to be there is a formal mandate on the coastal zone management unit to protect coastal resources. And this is defined clearly within the Coastal Zone Management Act of 1998. It also helps to define the boundary or the geographic scope of this revised ICZM plan. So this coastal zone management area is the area where all relevant coastal resources apply, in addition to those socioeconomic activities that may have an impact on the health of coastal resources or their integrity. And as defined in law, any new development proposal that is identified within the coastal zone management area shall have regard to the provisions and guidelines set out within the ICZM plan. That means that the unit will be acting in an advisory capacity to all statutory authorities on all relevant policies, regulations, and advisories that may apply within this area. It should be understood, however, that the coastal zone management area is not the same as a development setback distance, and this difference shall be explained a little later in my presentation. The recent poll that you undertook demonstrated that there was a range of coastal resources that need to be considered to help determine the spatial extent of this area. And put simply, the highly technical surveys and analyses that have been carried out by the unit over the last decade or so have been used to help define the inland and the offshore limits of this coastal zone management area. And this pays due consideration to the geographic footprint of coastal habitats, plus the cultural, landscape and seascape issues that are present within an area. And you can see on the screen a set of detailed criteria that have been used to help determine these inland and offshore limits. For example, you'll see that for coral reefs, the criteria used is related to the extent of living shallow water coral reef ecosystems, which is estimated to be close to the 150-metre bathymetric contour. Whereas the coastal landscape protection areas, which aren't specifically in this sub-area 7, but are, for example, within the Barbados National Park, should command a 200-metre inland buffer from the coastline. So the outcome of this analysis work is that we have a coastal zone management area that's variable in its extent around the country. And you can see from this slide in green that the coastal zone management area in sub-area 7 has a new set of defined inland and offshore limits when compared to those that were originally established within the 1998 plan. You can see that with the difference by looking at the blue diagonal lines on the slide. If you see the two red arrows to the right-hand side, this shows the new limits to those now set in 2020 to those that were set in 1998. For example, there's a much broader inland limit for the coastal zone management area to better reflect, firstly, the more advanced coastal flood inundation modelling work that's been undertaken and the new climate change adaptation scenario model predictions. Likewise, the offshore limits are further extended in a seaward direction to better embrace the importance of reef ecosystems in this area and improve awareness and knowledge of the ecosystem services that are operating within sub-area 7. All in all, it appears that space is needed that ensures that coastal policies relating to the protection of coastal resources needs to be offered for this particular sub-area for the future. As Dr. Brewster said, a new separate zone of influence is also defined, which extends from the seaward limit of the coastal zone management area out to the 12-mile territorial limit. And here, the role of the unit will be to raise awareness on marine developments to both the public, the private sectors, civil society, and the general public, or where future consideration of an offshore activity is being raised as part of a separate yet parallel blue economy strategy, which is, as you've heard, currently underway. And with the presence of the port within this sub-area, this matter is perhaps of more importance here than in any other sub-area, with Bridgetown and the surrounds also being the commercial hub of the country from a marine transport perspective. This slide shows how the new updated ICZM policy framework embraces a range of current and pending policies that are seeking to promote sustainable management of coastal and marine resources that also align with both the physical development plan and this new ICZM plan. This may help to provide advice on the development of joint initiatives to promote the conservation and sustainable exploitation of coastal resources within the zone of influence, which in the diagram covers the area from the reef edge out to the exclusive economic zones limit to the left-hand side. So before we move on to discuss the issue with regard to setbacks briefly, we shall pose another simple poll question, specifically on the coastal zone management area. And the question for you to answer is as follows. Do you agree with the new revised delimitation of this coastal zone management area compared to that which was defined in 1998? And you have a few options here. The top one is, yes, I understand the reasoning for the change in totality. Secondly, yes, I agree, but in parts it appears too wide. Thirdly, yes, I agree, but I think it's too narrow in its extent. Fourthly, no, I think it's better to keep with the 1998 version. Or fifthly, you have no real view either way. So give that some consideration and just select one of those options. And the results will give us a view as to whether our approach has been preferred. So this evening, we've got a 64% in agreement with our work and our revised changes. Interestingly, we've got 18% saying that they agree, but it's probably still too narrow. That's after I said that we've actually broadened it. So I think that'll be quite an interesting point of discussion in the question and answer session. So thank you for that. We'll now briefly outline how the revised ICZM plan is to use the area to improve climate resiliency into development planning through the use of setbacks. Why is this needed? Well, setbacks in fact are a key tool often used by coastal planners globally. They refer to areas where development should be restricted or where specific provisions need to be imposed or applied to ensure the safety of structures, persons, and wider communities, especially in the context of climate change. And in Barbados, specific policies are not, setback policies are not new. though historically linear distances selected were often not technically justified due to a poorer understanding of climate change impacts. So what the revised ICZM plan is now able to offer is a suite of refined setback distances and categories that are not only dictated by improved scientific understanding, but they are designed to not stand in the way of development to take place, even within the defined limits, so long as it complies, or a development application complies with necessary environmental impact assessment regulations, and appropriate technical studies are carried out that are deemed necessary by either town and country planning or as advised by the Coastal Zone Management Unit. And this revised ICZM plan that we're talking to you about tonight, similar to the existing one, can be used for the assessment of applications at this point, even without approval, as planning law explicitly states that a plan in preparation can be used as material consideration. So what do setbacks actually look like in sub-area 7? Well, you can see they include a range of possibilities, though not all of these apply to this specific sub-area 7. And this is mainly due to the terrain that sub-area 7 offers. Firstly, in orange, you'll see a minimum 30-metre setback as defined in the physical development plan from high water mark. But this applies only to beachfront development. It does not apply to land that is fronted by cliffs, which, as I've said earlier, does not apply to many places in this sub-area. For areas of coast where cliffs do occur outside of sub-area 7, the following setback criteria is applied, and this can be seen in the supporting screen, the supporting key to the right-hand side of this screen. A cliff collapse setback is set, and this is variable and is classified into 7 setback categories according to cliff type. And as can be seen in the grey box to the right-hand side of this slide, this can range from an additional 18 metres to 65 metres of setback. And in this area, no new development should occur in these areas, although this category does not apply to the example on the screen in sub-area 7. But also, there'll be a landscape setback. And again, this is a variable setback zone, and it will consist of between 100 metres setback from mean high water mark in rural areas to 200 metres in defined landscape protection areas or within the Barbados National Park. And this addresses the inland limits also of the coastal zone management area that was mentioned to you earlier. But as per the cliff collapse category, this does not apply on the example that you see on this screen. However, for the majority of sub-area 7, you'll be able to see swathes of blue. Now, these relate to new flood-related setbacks that are related to a range of the following possibilities. Firstly, there are flood inundation setbacks, and you'll see that in the stronger shaded pale blue. These limits are variable to include storm surge flooding inland limits to a 1 in 100 year return event, plus tsunami flood inundation limits. And here, within these areas, a policy of no new developments are recommended. Secondly, there is a new setback category entitled a climate change adaptation setback. And you'll see that in the slightly paler blue. And this is again a variable distance, and it is used to present the inland limits of climate change sea level rise projections as predicted from the latest IPCC model scenarios. And these additional setback distances are recommended based on these sea level rise related predictions. And both of these setbacks are new to the revised ICZM plan, and they represent the findings of the new up to state-of-the-art coastal modelling work, which was undertaken by Batt over the last few years and is helping to craft new coastal planning along your coast. What this looks like in terms of the new ICZM maps that are presented in Part D of the plan are shown on this slide. And here you can see the two setback categories clearly within the flood inundation setbacks, as in the lighter blue, being added on to the darker blue climate change adaptation setback distance, which is slightly further inland. And this intends to instill a stronger degree of climate compatible development policy setting for the future in sub-area 7, which, as Alison has said, is the most densely populated sub-area of the country. So I'm now going to spend just a few moments to talk you through a couple of the key parts of the ICZM plan, so that you're aware of the detail that's contained within them and how it seeks to address some of the issues that are facing sub-area 7. So with regard to what the ICZM plan will do, put simply, and as you can see on the screen, the plan for sub-area 7 shall at its core seek to provide the guidance needed to ensure that coastal development is carried out in a way that protects the natural beauty of the coast and ensures that safety of users is preserved. And I shall focus on these more specifically on these local issues in a moment. Part C of the plan represents the general policy guidance for all activities within this defined coastal zone management area. And this part provides the guidance for risk resilient ICZM from a national perspective. And you can see that 10 topics are covered that deal with the national management priorities that are relevant to the entire coastal zone management area of Barbados. And perhaps all of these are of relevance to sub-area 7 in one way or another. Emerging issues such as beach carrying capacity and safety issues, coupled with marine conservation demands and needs in Carlisle Bay, are all addressed under the theme of beach management, whereas the topic of emerging issues goes into more detail with regard to the design and planning advisories that relate to, for example, piered structures and jetties, such as offshore restaurants and structures and development applications that may arise as a consequence of these demands. And we're seeing these quite regularly coming into town and country planning, and I'm sure you all know separate examples. The one on the screen is just demonstrating a very clear one of the Radisson Hotel along Carlisle Bay. And these are addressed in more detail within the plan. And that's shown in the yellow box to the right-hand side. Each topic provides a description of the current status of that particular theme, followed by the possible national implications of not considering that topic and the impact that this may have on delivering sustainable integrated coastal zone management. And from that, management guidance is then presented on how the topic should be applied in a manner that better embraces climate and disaster resilience. Finally, actions are listed with recommendations on suitable lead organisations to take forward each proposed action. And in addition, there's a timescale for implementation and an indicator which can be used to measure progress during the lifespan of the ICZM plan. Part E focuses on implementation. And this will be a long-term and continuous process that involves a range of agencies, institutions, and authorities. And this is often known as a whole of government approach. And some elements require immediate action and will be straightforward to incorporate within the day-to-day operations of responsible agencies. In certain situations, elements can be quite readily built into existing arrangements or require private individuals and the public to support that particular part of the implementation. There may also be the need for some new procedures and practices developed over time, because the considerable scope and the variety of topics that are covered by the plan, including the new emerging issues that may arise, such as I raised earlier, all need to be addressed in a timely manner. And as shown in the diagram, 6 ICZM policy outcomes, you see that in the steps at the bottom of this diagram, are proposed to be achieved through compliance of 4 priority areas. And these are seen in the pillars of the diagram, namely collaboration, capacity to continue, commitment, and communication. And a clear roadmap, as shown in this slide, is also designed to link the various national guidance actions as described in Part C of the plan to the 6 ICZM policy outcomes. And each specific action is then assigned to one or a range of ICZM policy outcomes as appropriate. And these are then assigned a roadmap timeline. And this is shown by the different colored stars, such as roadmap 1 in green, such for the short term over 2 years, roadmap 2 as in yellow, medium term 2 to 5 years, or a roadmap 3, which is a red star, and this is more long term, between 5 and 10 years. And you can see on this slide with regard to Part E that it goes into detail into a range of important supporting implementation topics. And I do sort of thoroughly urge you to take a look at this online on the CZMU's website, because there's a lot of information on information needs and data management, on education, on training and public outreach, on institutional and capacity related issues, and on evaluation and monitoring procedures, and importantly, on financial considerations. And all these topics take too long for me to discuss tonight, but I would recommend that you take a look at these. And on the matter of financial consideration, the plan at the moment doesn't come up with a formal figure with regards to the budget that's going to be required to implement this plan. However, following these 8 public inquiry meetings, efforts are going to be undertaken to fine-tune that figure and to include a more targeted valuation to determine how the Coastal Zone Management Unit have got to work in partnership with other stakeholders to deliver this plan over the next 10 years. And to this end, this slide briefly shows that intended development cycle for the plan. And you'll see with the tick at the top that declares how the Coastal Zone Management Unit have prepared, with support from IH Cantabria, the update to this 1998 plan. This then is going to be modified to reflect all comments received during this public inquiry process. And once the government of Barbados are happy with these updates, the plan shall then need to be formally approved so that the Coastal Zone Management Unit can start to begin and make the plan effectual on the ground. It shall then be formally monitored and revised every 10 years or as requested by the Director of the Coastal Zone Management Unit. So my final few minutes are just to build on the earlier presentations and to briefly discuss some of the features of Sub-Area 7 to help facilitate the questions. And this sector of the coastline is, as you know, predominantly southwest facing. And the land use is dominated by the capital city of Bridgetown and the surrounding suburbs, which are important for industry, and it contains the port and a deep water harbour. And the major coastal feature from a recreational perspective includes the sheltered area of Carlisle Bay, where the Constitution River discharged to the sea. And the bay provides a safe anchorage and is therefore used extensively for small craft and recreational purposes, and a key focus for water sports. Needham's Point forms the southern boundary of Carlisle Bay and offers some of the best views in Bridgetown. Carlisle Bay, as was mentioned earlier, is a National Heritage Conservation Area within the Physical Development Plan, and it's the central part of the bay which has been proposed as a marine reserve, which will incorporate a number of wrecks that are also popular dive sites. And as you can see from the map, the coast does remain exposed to flood risk and storm surge and sea level rise, hence the large swathes of blue that you can see on that particular slide. So with high urban development and the proximity to key critical infrastructure, such as the port and the supporting industry, the protection of these assets in a sustainable way needs to be continued. And this slide reconfirms the key issues that are faced within Sub-Area 7, and importantly, how the ICZM Plan intends to address these through the implementation of a number of strategic objectives that focus on enforcing setbacks, adapting urban areas to be more resilient to climate change, and where possible, trying to initiate a network of open spaces including and ensuring beach access in line with sustainable beach carrying capacity limits. It'll also include the need to improve bathing water quality to support the integrity of the Carlisle Bay Heritage Conservation Area and Marine Reserve, whilst ensuring conservation principles are adhered to throughout. This slide is taken from Part D of the revised plan. And based on the risks and features known in Sub-Area 7, it shows that a series of possible actions could be considered. And you'll see on the left-hand side that each possible action that's assigned to Sub-Area 7 is aligned to the revised general guidance topics, which we've already discussed to you, and are found in more detail in Part C of the plan. For example, you can see that each action is given a unique code, and highlighted in pink, you'll see a couple of examples for discussion. Firstly, under the general guidance topic of beach management, an action is defined to ensure the protection of turtle nesting sites within the framework of a new national beach management plan. And that's being defined in as you can see. Others can be seen as, for example, declaring improvements to facilities and ease of access at popular recreation sites. And importantly, under the public awareness general theme, an action to conduct bi-yearly public meetings to identify new issues in the sub-area. So to this end, the whole of government model is proposed here, as opposed to each of these actions being the direct responsibility of the Coastal Zone Management Unit. Of course, much more detail is provided within the plan. And if you've not had time to review those details, I would urge you to take a look at particularly parts C and D of the plan, which you can download from the CZMU website. So my final poll question will feed into a final presentation by the Deputy Director of the Coastal Zone Management Unit. And on your screen, you'll see a final question which will come up. And this is asking you to determine how you believe this sub-area needs to be managed. The first question is, do you feel that new engineering, whether that's hard, soft, or a mix of intervention measures, are needed in this sub-area to support the protection and the rehabilitation or the management of coastal habitats? If you do believe that engineering is a high priority in this sub-area, score it more towards a 5. If you don't think it's needed, score it more towards a 1. The next question is whether you believe in this sub-area that new social measures are needed to support improved vulnerable community resilience to coastal hazards. Again, if you think that social measures are of high priority, score it a 5. If they're of low priority, score it a 1. With the focus being it's the economic hub sub-area of the country, this question, third question, relates to whether you believe that new economic measures are needed to support local fisherfolk, tourist, private sector, and marine area management in this area. So if you believe that it's specifically economic measures that are going to be needed in this area, score that a 5. If you don't think that economic measures are the priority, score it a number 1. So I'll leave you a moment to give your perspective. And in about 10 seconds, we'll bring the results together before I pass over to Ricardo for his presentation. And the scores. From an engineering perspective, we've got an interesting mix here. So we've got quite an equal spread. From 25% of you don't believe that engineering is really the way forward, then it is going through 25%, 70%, and 33%. So we've got quite an interesting mix there. From the social perspective, we've got a strong view. 83% of you are saying that really it's social measures that are going to be needed to be improved upon to manage better coastal resource management in sub-area 7. And we've got 67% of you saying that economic intervention measures are going to be needed to support business and conservation in this area. So those are interesting. We'll maximize those in the final questions. So for now, I'll pass over to Ricardo for his presentation.
Thank you, Jonathan. Alison, can you confirm that you can see the screen?
I can see the screen, but I can't see you.
Yes, okay. I'm not allowed to share my video right now, so I will just continue.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, okay. I've been allowed to. Okay. So the graphic on the screen shows the current situation in relation to developers and regulators, where we have different incentives at the level of the developer who is seeking to maximize profits, which often relates to maximizing the footprint and sometimes encroaching on setback limits, while the regulator is seeking to protect threatened and scarce resources. So there's that argument that ensues. But we believe that the economic valuation of disaster risk management will change that whole dynamic. When we speak of disaster risk management, we have to really understand what we're talking about is the application of an economic lens to hazard assessment, because we've been doing hazard assessment for years now. We all understand the impacts of hazards in terms of the same setbacks and the 1 in 100 storm surge line, etc. But for the first time, we're looking at the actual financial losses associated with hazards, and that changes the scenario completely. So I'm trying to change my, right. So before we get into the financial application, it's important to note that we significantly improved the science. So what you see here, some consultants in the field, the photo on the right, if you look very carefully, you'll see a drone in the air, which was deployed to measure the actual contours of the cliff. Prior to this, there was a setback on cliff edges based on an estimated undercut and a recession rate. What we did is that we flew the drone, so you measure the tails of the cliff, and you can see here 3D images of the cliff produced from the drone footage. And then you did some boreholes, so you actually understand the structural integrity of the rock that composes the cliff. And then you come up with a safe zone for setback. So it's based on an engineering analysis rather than those two previously mentioned assessments. If you look to the lower left-hand corner, you'll see a yellow hatch area, which represents the measured undercut at a cliff on the northern section of the island. So it's no longer an estimate, because you can imagine before the drone technology, there was no way to really go there with the waves crashing against the cliff edge to go and accurately measure the extent of the undercut. In addition, when we're talking about storm surge and setback on beaches, we would have looked at a record hurricane tracks within 500 kilometers of the island that would have impacted the shoreline, both actual database and a synthetic database for the period of time where there was no records of tracks because the technology simply did not exist. We understand exactly how hurricanes would have impacted the island and the impact of storm surge that would have been experienced. The other thing is the actual data inputs in terms of the water depths and the measurements on land. So how the waves impact your shoreline is completely dependent on the water depths, the nearshore bathymetry, that's what we call it. And then to the extent of run-up is dependent on the height of the land. So if you look at that green line, which starts in the nearshore, goes over the breakwater, the sand, and then it goes over the actual building. What we see here, from the right to the left of the screen, the blue represents the water depths. You will then see the breakwater around 160. Then you will see the sand, you will see the vegetation, and then to the left of the screen, you will see the red, which represents the actual building and the rooftop. So that information was collected using a similar technology to the drone, but it was an aircraft that was flown using radar technology to pick up all this information. So you can understand the quality of data $9.8 million was actually spent collecting data. And when you're dealing with data-driven policy, the quality of the data really impacts the decisions that you make. So just wanted to highlight the quality of the information that went into making our decisions. Okay, so what you see here is a basic box model, which illustrates the value of the work that we do at coastal zone management. So basically, we manage the coral and the marine assets, the coastal and marine assets, the beaches, the coral reefs, seawater, the natural assets, as well as the built assets, coastal property, and the infrastructure. And these assets provide goods and services in terms of human well-being, health, risk reduction, recreation, cultural, etc., cultural value, biodiversity as well. And what we're looking at now is actually the economic value of those goods and services in terms of jobs, revenues, employment. Also, to something, their creative is to look at even as mentioned here, the avoided health costs. So, what is the value of, for example, the South Coast Boardwalk, Richard Haynes Boardwalk, as it relates to those that exercise on the boardwalk and improve their health? So this is what we do at Coastal, and this is the reason that Coastal Zone Management Unit is important. And then once you understand the economic benefits that flow towards the public by maintaining your resources in the coastal zone, then you have the opportunity to enhance them and improve the willingness to pay. So people will pay more money to enjoy a more pristine coastal environment. So we're scaling it down now. We're looking specifically at the investment in disaster risk management. And when we talk about that, we're looking specifically at assets in relation to beaches, coastal property, and coastal infrastructure. The services related to tourism, risk reduction, recreation. So when you manage your built environment and you build with resilience in mind, what you do is that you reduce the potential losses from a hazard. So there's a storm event, but you built in a way that your property is not that badly impacted, and repairs can occur quickly, or if they're necessary at all, and you can be back to work as soon as possible. When you build in a way that is not resilient, then you have greater losses associated with hazards and a longer period of time to recover. So the economic value of disaster risk management in real terms is avoided damages, minimize disruption to business, and then to just the improved environment and the willingness to pay is enhanced, as mentioned before. Now, I just wanted to focus at one line in this table. So we had, as part of the Coastal Risk Assessment and Management Program, we had an independent consultant come in as part of our obligation to the Inter-American Development Bank and do an assessment of the loan. And row number 5 points to the fact that the $28 million that was borrowed from the IDB resulted in $70 million approximately in return in terms of savings from avoided losses to beaches only. And this is a situation where beaches were valued very narrowly based only on tourism revenue. So what we're saying here is that if you implement the policy guidelines coming out of the project, you achieve $70 million in savings over the next 25 years. So it's significant. So that changes the discussion tremendously. So it's not a situation where we don't understand the potential loss to sea level rise. And armed with this information, we can start to mitigate the losses. And this is what our policies are all about. So just to be clear, we're not crunching numbers and seeking to monetize the natural environment for trade. So we maintain the focus of natural resource protection and beach erosion management. But this new tool in the ICZM Integrated Coastal Zone Management Toolkit allows the assessment of the economic benefits to be derived from the controls that we continue to seek to implement, that we've always sought to implement, and now we've enhanced. And we are confident that the realization of the importance of maintaining economic benefits from these ecosystems creates a clear incentive for developers to follow our planning guidelines. So thank you, Alison, and back to you.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. Attendees, now is your opportunity to ask your questions. We're requesting that you use the question and answer feature at the bottom of your screen. If you cannot, if we need an intervention, we will then use the mic. We will open your mic if you have an urgent intervention to make. But please type your questions at the bottom of the screen in the question and answer feature. We really look forward to a good conversation, and particularly with this sub area, noting that it is heavily populated and heavily used as well. So we look forward to a wonderful discussion here this evening. I have one question thus far, and Ms. Harding has asked, please define new developments. Does that include redevelopment of existing footprints? And panelists, please indicate which one of you will be willing to answer this question for me. Panelists. Fabian, go right ahead, please.
Pleasant good evening to all. I would say the simple answer is yes. As long as you're proposing to do work on the site, I think it's and the term development meets the definition of development within the Town and Country Development Planning Act. I would say yes, it is new development. Thank you.
I hope we've been able to answer your question, Ms. Harding. Just let me know, and you can type it in and let me know we've been able to answer your question. I don't see any other questions at this moment. Any more questions from you? Have you been really clear?
Kind of in the, I think they're in the chat area, Alison.
Okay, I see one here from Kim Holder, and she asks, is the new climate change adaptation setback taken from the high water mark or the established building line along the shoreline? Is it taken from the high water mark, colleagues?
Correct answer. Yeah, it is taken from the mean high water mark. Yeah, that will be the that's the start of that particular setback area. Yes.
Yeah, all setbacks are taken from the high water mark.
Correct.
Any other questions? Any other thing you want to tell us? I see that Dr. Aline has her hand up. Go ahead, Dr. Aline.
Yes, just want that to be clarified. If in the case where Jonathan's presentation showed extensive areas of blue for the flood inundation and climate change adaptation going way back, like to the bottom of the first ridge, it looked like to me, not near the waters at all. A lot of these properties are very small. Explain to our participants or the persons who are here, how in applying that to your small lot at the bottom of the cliff, and you have to take a measurement from the high water mark, how does that actually work? Just to follow on from the question that was asked earlier, just trying to figure out how does the individual get that done? They do not have a property on the coast. They're way in, but the flood inundation setback applies to them. curious.
I think I can answer that one for you, even though, and Fabian will come after me in terms of the fact, if you have an area like Spikestown, for example, where we know the flood area goes up to Gills Terrace. So if somebody wants to do to build a house, we will recommend certain conditions. We can ask that person to raise their floor level so that they will be less impacted by in the event of a flooding. So those are the type of things, the innovative measures that we are trying to put in place to alleviate the impact of things like flooding, coastal erosion, all the hazards that we studied. So it's not that you cannot develop, but it is how you develop that piece of land. I hope I've been able to answer your question, Dr. Aline.
So it's not no new development, it is development with conditions.
With conditions.
Okay.
Now, obviously, if the person doesn't want to do that, that raises another question. You know, if
my question though is how does that person who is not on the shoreline measure what is applying to them from the high water mark? Do they go onto somebody else's property to establish a high water mark? I'm trying to figure out how it works in application. I think Fabian was going to answer that question though, and I think there's another participant who has his hand raised.
Again, everyone. Normally, when we, for example, information that is available from the NCRIP, and for some properties that we would have looked at already, we can see the inundation zones for that 1 in 25 year, 1 in 50 year, etc. And those can be superimposed when we are doing our planning assessments on properties. So therefore, that enables us to say, well, in our recommendations, that your property falls within an inundation zone, and hence you are advised then to make the necessary mitigation measures that Alison would have outlined in terms of elevation of the ground floor, etc., accordingly. So in our assessment, we would have already started to do initiatives like that, where we can see the inundation zone relative to the particular development and make the necessary recommendations accordingly. Does that answer the question?
With respect to the flood, yes. Climate change adaptation, I think that was what Ms. Holder was asking. How does that apply? How does that setback apply from the high water mark?
Yeah, on the in terms of high water mark surveys, those are normally done by those individuals that actually are on the coast proper, because you can imagine that the remainder of the properties in the more inland areas are essentially landlocked. But it doesn't be landlocked in terms of land parcels and ownership, doesn't exempt you away from a watershed in terms of inundation, you see. So therefore, it may be a mistake to just say, okay, I'm on a few land parcels landward of the nearest coastal lot that fronts the beach, but ideally you might be just as vulnerable to flooding. And if you can step out of the zone a bit and use the area that most people might be familiar with, whole town, and the flooding that occurs on the landward side of the coastal road can be just as awful as that which occurs on the seaward side of the coastal road. So the intent here is to provide the necessary guidance for flooding wherever you are in the coastal zone management area.
I think it's a good point to add too, that this helps us to prioritize specific areas around the country. So, for example, where we know these certain areas would be affected by potential impacts of climate change, government can prioritize which areas, for example, needs intervention. So we can say this area where we need to adapt to climate change, we can put the appropriate measures in place. So it's a way of prioritizing government's intervention across the island. So, and the thing is, it's not only along the coastline, it's over the entire country where you can have climate change adaptation setbacks as well.
Thank you.
We have a question from Mark Thompson, who goes on to say that flood inundation setbacks and climate change adaptation setbacks has significant implications for our development and redevelopment. And we totally agree with you, Mrs. Thompson. I think we need to have a question to have an interaction on this one. So can you please open the mic for Mr. Thompson for me, please?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great, thank you. Yeah, I just think I just think there's so many implications there to kind of put that in writing is a lot. As I'm looking there and seeing all the implications as it relates to the flood inundation setbacks and the climate change adaptation setbacks, I mean, the implications in terms of our economic development, let's say, because most of our probably we make income probably resides along the coastlines quite a bit. And if, let's say, for instance, you have, I don't know, I'm not sure what the implications are in terms of development and existing development. Let's say Radisson, for instance, or Hilton, for instance, or the proposed Hyatt. I mean, and also just the whole redevelopment of Bridgetown, if you and that has implications just for Barbados as a developing country. I mean, what I'm seeing is almost suggesting a total change in priority. I don't know if I'm seeing it incorrectly, but it would seem to me that this is really significant, and you might have to make an about turn in how you go about your planning going forward and what your economic zones are and so forth and so on. I mean, you can tell me if I'm on the wrong track or if I'm on the right track.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thompson. Ramon Roach has his hand up, so he'll provide you with some answers.
Good night, everyone. Thank you for your question, Mr. Thompson. I'm sure the planners will follow up on this, but the zones that are established in or are outlined in the plan, what they do is identify the areas where additional planning guidance can be provided to people looking to develop or people looking to modify their existing structures. So it gives you an indicator that if you're going to redevelop, here's how I can build that in a way that is more resilient to climate change, and that I will suffer less damage, potential damage, in case anything actually happens, some unlikely event or one of the more probable events does occur. So it's really about identifying the areas where additional building considerations need to be made, and over time, by having people follow this planning guidance, Barbados will become more resilient in the areas where it is exposed to hazards, so that over time we will be able to suffer less damage as a country and be able to recover more quickly from some kind of a hazard event. And it also provides the planners, Toronto County Planning, as well as ourselves, as well as anybody looking to develop any substantial developments in Barbados, a guide as to, okay, where am I going to locate my development? Am I going to put it here? If I put it here, then it has certain considerations I have to think about. However, if I move it outside of these hazard zones, I have fewer considerations to worry about. So it provides guidance to both the planners as well as developers, as well as people who are living in these areas as to how they can best look to mitigate the potential effects of these hazards. So it's really about guidance and over time becoming more resilient as a country.
Okay, so and is my mic still open?
Yes, yes it is.
Yes, it is.
Okay,
Go
right.
right ahead.
Okay, yeah. So so it sounds to me like I'm on the right direction.
Yes, you are.
Because what I mean, to me, the implication is that the land on the coast could potentially be worth less than what it's worth now, and land further in could be worth literally a complete sort of about turn. That's the implication. Even let's say, for instance, let's take the Bridgetown area where you're including the New Orleans area and so forth. A lot of those areas which are densely populated and probably really need to be redeveloped from a housing perspective. And I mean, where do you even go from there? And the question is, when you do that, then you're not talking necessarily about maybe housing in the same area. You might be talking about housing outside of that area. And then how do you, I mean, and Bridgetown in itself, the redevelopment of Bridgetown in itself. So so you could have a situation where it's less desirable, and the value of that property goes down, while at the same time it costs more to develop in that area. At least that's what I'm seeing. I don't, I'm just saying that. I don't know. I mean, there may be other I don't know, things to consider at the end of the day when you come to, this is a draft, and when you come to the final thing. But these are the things that I am seeing right now at the moment, which give me some significant cause for, I don't want to say concern, but certainly to look at it and say, oh, wait a minute, this is a different way. And this is just, we're talking about the sub area 7, but it goes, further north and in similar ways. Those are just my thoughts. I don't know if anybody has any further comments, but that's what it seems to me, the direction where things are going.
Yeah.
Thanks, Alison. Let me just follow up, Alison. So agreed, Mr. Thompson, in terms of concern that you would have. But so the flood inundation boundary is based on what's called a 1 in 100-year flood event. So we looked at a bunch of models and we determined that this is the potential extent if we get a 1 in 100-year frequency storm event. So that is not to say that that event will happen every 100 years. That is not to say that that event will happen on any kind of frequent time scale. It is that there is a potential for these types of events to occur. Given that information, how can you improve your resiliency as a country? And that can be done in more than one way. So it can be that we look at actually increasing the resilience of properties themselves or buildings themselves, or we can look at the possibility of reducing the impact of those events. So if it is that flooding is a potential event that could occur, or that this is an area that has the potential to flood, we can implement different drainage mitigation measures, different ways to actually get the water away from these vulnerable areas in case there is some kind of event. So, and lower the actual vulnerability of those areas. So it's not all doom and gloom. What it does is it gives us the information we need to then make decisions as to what's the best way to alleviate this potential risk. Is it to move people out? Is it to increase mitigation measures? Is it to strengthen buildings? So it gives us the tools to start doing those kind of cost benefit analyses. So
I understand.
So it's
I
really
understand.
just the baseline. It's the baseline for us to start making decisions about how we're
I
going to chart
understand.
direction in the country in the future.
No, I understand. And I guess my next question would be, and I understand that you have to approach it the way you are, but I guess my next thing would be, how has this informed the physical development plan? I mean, obviously there's one existing and you're doing this now, and this may have a significant impact on the physical development plan and how you move forward, I presume, because I mean, to me, it has to be looked at as an overall master plan, because, you know, to make it all work, which may involve an earlier survey talked about economic measures and social measures and so forth. You know, maybe a whole look at that to see how everything works. So that's just my comment, and you know, but very good presentation, but obviously we've got some significant discussion to take place, I think. All right.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thompson. I hope we've been able to answer your question. I see Ricardo has his hand up. Ricardo, I see Jonathan as well. So let's start with Ricardo and then Jonathan. Fabian had his hand up earlier, but he took it down.
Yeah, just wanted to add a little bit to what Ramon was saying. So I think it's very important to frame this from the perspective of mitigating losses, because all over the world there are examples of places that are developed which are exposed to hazards. But if you have an understanding, if you have a quantitative risk assessment, what that enables you to do is to implement cost-efficient mitigation measures. So it's not a matter of, you know, fleeing from the environment. It's a matter of what resources are available to manage the risk on the ground. So, you know, for example, for coastal property, investing in coastal protection and shoreline enhancement. And then in terms of financial protection, it changes the whole discussion, and this can also be a positive discussion, because in the absence of this information, insurance companies may often take conservative proxy indicators and look at what's happening in countries that have been devastated. If we have this information, then we have to be careful to use it positively, with the focus of empowerment and encouraging resilience. So, you know, Ramon started the conversation. We just wanted to add that a little bit to it.
Jonathan?
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think Ricardo actually answered my points. So thank you, Ricardo. But adding on to that, I think an interesting, putting it into context, for example, today on BBC News, I heard that, you know, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, you know, globally, I think infrastructure is shy of what it needs to be to move global economies forward, to the tune of about $2 trillion worth of investments. I mean, that's just at a global level. But Mark's comments were highly valuable to tonight's discussion, and with a context in regard to Bridgetown, and then broader to Barbados, because you can actually say, well, what is of pivotal importance? It's not just infrastructure, where that needs to be built. And I see Anne Harding's got another comment, you know, linked to this, you know, saying, well, developers will just keep land filling. But the main topic is to say, well, okay, how can we use the ICZM plan to change the mindset of infrastructure, as Ramon said, and how can we building a more greening perspective, but also more to the point, how can we design impact infrastructure? So it's not necessarily the size, but it's how valuable and how useful that infrastructure is to those communities that really need it in order to facilitate a growing economy. So impact infrastructure can benefit from an improved risk resilient ICZM plan, because this plan can set the signposts for where impact infrastructure needs to be targeted, and the guidance and the building regulations that are going to be needed to make that difference. So I think it's a very good point that Mark's raised. And I think that's where the plan has its value, if we can influence the initiation of impact infrastructure around Barbados.
Thank you, Jonathan, for that. I have another question, and that is from an anonymous attendee. That person said, would it be correct to say that the high watermark setback is the fundamental tool, but additional measures are recommended to take account of the inundation zone and the climate change, depending on the location of the site? I think that is what we were discussing throughout the last couple minutes. that while we have the high water mark, there are other tools that we take into consideration in assessing any development application along the coastline. All right. Another question for Chesterfield Marshall. Can the planner speak to any analysis of the impact of fishing and commercial recreational use on the marine resources to the formulation of this draft plan? The impact of fishing and commercial recreational use. And that person who will seek to answer this is Fabian Hines, our coastal planner. Go ahead, Fabian.
I would say this plan primarily seeks to acknowledge the issue of fisheries via habitat conservation and habitat restoration. And it is clearly outlined, if you have access to the plan, when you look at section C7 of the plan, you would clearly get that. And it also the plan itself also makes reference to the fisheries division as the agency responsible for fisheries. And I'm sure you're aware of the fisheries management plan and the Fisheries Act and so on and so forth, which provides the detailed guidance. And I think even the regulations now are being drafted from a fisheries management context. Okay, so this plan, it seeks to bolster fisheries by habitat preservation and habitat restoration measures, okay, because you can recognize, as outlined in the plan, that a combination of factors in terms of habitat degradation and overfishing all work in tandem, okay? It's not one causing the next. We're at a juncture now where all these factors combine to result in the state of the coral reef, the state of the coastline that we are presently observing. Okay, I would leave the answer short. If there is any further clarity, I'd be willing to respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabian. Mr. Marshall, I hope we've been able to answer your question. But before we go back to you, Mr. McHugh is going to add on to what Fabian just said.
Yeah, thanks, Fabian. And yeah, it was just to clarify that the section C7 of the plan does go into some reasonable detail on the implications of the plan's policies on fisheries development. And there is an action plan set out there, which actually, articulates the confirmation of the fisheries management plan, the importance of supporting in partnership with the fisheries division on implementing the fisheries management plan with specific reference to reef fish, sea urchins and sea turtles. And there's a suite of other actions. So, in my presentation, I'll talk about the whole of government approach and exactly how Fabian has said that, the plan does focus on the support of fisheries management, but from a habitat preservation perspective. That is the focus of how the technical studies that have been done is supporting fisheries management, making sure that the habitats and the coastal resources, which is the fundamental aspect of this plan, are protected, preserved, and enhanced wherever possible to support blue economy industries, of which fishery is one of them. So I hope that helps.
Mr. Marshall, I hope that helped. Just type and let me know if we were able to answer your question. I have another question. What if a development is already existing within the high water mark setback? What if the existing development now falls within the high water mark? How do we treat to those developments? Fabian, go right ahead.
Fabian and Mike.
Yes, sorry, I just realized. If there's a development that already exists on a parcel of land, an approved parcel of land that exists within the recommended setback zone. What we cannot do is render that property undevelopable. What we do is to try to ensure that that development does not encroach any further seaward, or in other words, make itself more vulnerable than it already is, and to include any other additional measures to further improve on its, or reduce its vulnerability, I should say, in addition to the existing setback it has. Okay, so you have that setback, that building line along that area of coastline. If there's an existing structure on site that is being redone or redeveloped, don't go any further seaward than that structure. If we always look for opportunities for improvement, so if we see that there has that, the land is available in terms of its size, its area, that we often try to get that development to go set back as far as is reasonable. Okay. All right, I will conclude there.
So if we see, for example, that the development is impacting the coastal processes or coastal resources,
Yeah.
we'll ask the developer to set back once there's enough land available to do that.
Yeah.
It's important that we maintain the processes. It's important that we maintain our resources, and it's important that we also try to preserve the existing property and lives. So if we see that there's an impact, we ask the applicant, the developer, to set back as much as possible to try to maintain the 30-meter setback. Of course, our coastline is so narrow, in some instances it might not be possible, but we can use other measures, other conditions to ensure that we reduce the impacts of the hazards which we would have studied on any development to maintain property and to maintain lives. Anybody wanted to answer anything else on that particular question? I hope we've been able to answer that as well. I have another question from Mr. Thompson. He says, how will this research and information emanating inform the physical development plan? Is there a collaborative approach? Fabian, it seems as though you want to answer this one. I see you smiling.
Let somebody have first crack first if they want to. If not,
you go ahead. I will bring up the rear for you.
Typically, the physical development plan provides the blueprint for physical development control across the length and breadth of Barbados. The physical development plan makes reference to the integrated coastal management plan, this plan up for discussion this evening, for greater detail in terms of guidance for development of the coastline. So therefore, the answer is yes, as it relates to a collaborative approach between the physical development plan and the integrated coastal management plan. However, though, the integrated coastal management plan emanates from the physical development plan within that context, and not necessarily the other way around. Alison, over to you.
I think you did a good job. What we do, we provide the finer details based on our studies. Obviously, the physical development plan would not go into in-depth analysis of our coastline. It's a broad policy framework where we provide the expert scientific information on aspects of the coastal zone management area. So we are sort of a part of the physical development plan, and as such, as we provide the details, the detailed analysis of our coastline. We have another question. I hope Mr. Thompson will be able to answer yours. An anonymous attendee has said this sub-area is used heavily by recreational and tourist-related activities. Are there new regulations or guidelines in this plan to protect the Carlisle Bay Marine Park from the emergence of things like beach toys and control other things like catamarans, dive boats, jet skis, etc.? Carlisle Bay is like a traffic jam on Sundays. Someone please answer this question for this anonymous attendee. Any hands raised? Go right ahead. Jonathan's you?
Sure. I mean, as a non-Bayesian, I hear exactly what you're saying. I see it when I come to visit regularly. The plan itself does introduce new recommendations and guidelines for beach management. And as part of that, it is recommending quite strongly the adoption through the Barbados Bureau of Standards, the new international standard for tourist beaches. Now, as part of that, it would need to undertake one of three things. Firstly, a detailed beach risk assessment. Secondly, an assessment of beach carrying capacity. And then thirdly, introduce the control measures that are going to be needed to manage that beach space. So this will be quite new and innovative for Barbados. It will need to work in the unit will need to work in partnership with the NCC as they take ultimate responsibility for beach management activities around the country. However, the method of improving the understanding of beach carrying capacity will then influence the measures needed or the regulations that are needed to be put in place to ensure that inflatable recreational areas in the sea are either managed or banned. And then the international standard will dictate exactly what are the control measures, the signage, the health and safety measures, which need to be set up for different types of beaches depending on their carrying capacity. So that will apply in Carlisle Bay. It also applies equally at Bottom Bay or any other pocket beach. So this is in section part 3 of the plan under that general theme of beach management, plus the general theme of emerging issues where new recreational demands are being placed on Barbados. Those are the two areas where the plan has introduced new ideas and new recommendations for consideration. But maybe I'll pass over to my panel members to give it a little bit more of a spin on local issues of Carlisle Bay.
I see Dr. Brewster has his hand raised. Go on, Dr. Brewster.
Hi, thanks, Alison.
You're welcome.
I think the issue that's really and truly being raised is also speaking in relation to the proposed development for Carlisle Bay to be forming part of a marine managed area on the south coast of Barbados, and that is still very much well entrained. As we speak, the order to designate the area is with the CPC, the Chief Parliamentary Council, and that once finalized, we will then have to come to the public in terms of how the space is going to be managed effectively. The Carlisle Bay Marine Park will form a park within the marine managed space that's supposed to stretch from the pier head up to Rockley Beach. And there are certain activities that will be permitted and other activities that won't be permitted within that marine managed space. Those are going to be coming out very soon to the general public and those stakeholders that will fall within that catchment area. So yes, please keep listening out because it will be coming. People will say that this has been coming for a very, very long time, and perhaps that is true, but there's still certain other issues that have to speak specifically to how the marine space will be managed. And that still has not been finalized as yet, but the designation and the boundaries are with the Chief Parliamentary Council now, and then the internal management of the space will then have to be finalized.
Thank you, Dr. Brewster. Someone has their hand up as well. I have a question for you, any member of the panel. Someone had asked me, how do we intend to control development along Carlisle Bay and Brandon's, considering that persons are moving their businesses more and more seaward? How do we intend to do that? Anyone? We'll tackle that in terms of access and setbacks. Fabian, go right ahead. Your mic is still not open.
All right, sorry again. I'll mute myself. We essentially tackle the issue of setbacks via our recommendations to the Chief Town Planner. Okay, we issue those recommendations always, as we outlined several times and moments ago, where we either ask people to hold the line in terms of the existing setback if they are within the vulnerable zone already with existing development, or we ask them to improve wherever that possibility exists. But the decision is not ours to make. We simply make the recommendation as such, and that is my response to that. The same is true as it relates to accesses in terms of lateral access, because the setbacks facilitate lateral access for all and sundry along the beach. And it's not just about vulnerability, and so it's about people too. And where possible, we ask to maintain accesses from coastal roads to beaches as well. So that perpendicular access also applies. So that is the substance of our recommendations that we make consistently in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabian. Dr. Brewster, go right ahead, please.
Right. Yeah. Just to build a little bit further on what Fabian was saying, I think also the reality that we're facing is that some people are still of the perception that because they view a beach as being wide, that it should allow them to actually come forward with their building line. And this is posing a major problem for us. And this is something that we've tracked throughout all of these consultations, just to remind persons that just because the beach is wide, it doesn't mean that it is necessarily safe, given the increased risk that we are facing more and more, especially with the changing climate. We know and we have seen the impact of storm surge impacts on Carlisle Bay, where in the area of the boatyard down towards Pirates Cove, the entire beach has been removed after a storm passed, and we weren't impacted, but the storm went to the north of us. And we've had the other instance where the storm went to the south of us and did devastating damage on many of the South Coast beaches, leading to a lot of coastal inundation along the entire South Coast. I think this is something that has to continually be reiterated. Property owners are moving fence lines forward and then trying to plant trees and use movable furniture, etc., on these coastlines. And then when something happens, they want to then rush to claim that they need to protect their fence line. In truth and in fact, once your fence line had been set up, the need to move forward should not be really and truly a priority, because you are putting yourself at risk. That's the best way of putting it, as Fabian has rightfully said. We as coastal, we report instances where we see fence lines being moved further seaward, and therefore not only trying to impede lateral access, but more importantly, also putting those same fences at risk, because when storms pass and the fence is ripped down and we have metal sticking up in sand, etc., we can have a problem. So we would just like to cautiously remind persons to leave the fence lines in the positions and allow the natural buffering principles of the beach to take place, to allow it to recover naturally after events pass, and also recognize that beaches are expendable, and therefore you don't want to be building on beaches to place your property at risk.
Thank you, Dr. Brewster. Ms. Kim Holder has asked, following on from what was said about the establishment of the Carlisle Bay Marine Park, will the Folkestone Marine Park be included in being formally established as a conservation area too? Anyone on the panel? Go right ahead, Director.
Yes, the Folkestone Marine Park is going to be still part and parcel of the West Coast Marine Managed Area. And that West Coast Marine Managed Area is going to be stretching from the area of Weston near St. Albans Church all the way down to Fitz Village. And the boundaries that pre-exist now for the Folkestone Marine Reserve will be retained in there. There are also several other designations that will be going on within that space as well that will have clearly defined activities and properties for each of them. That boundary, that external boundary has also been defined. And once the Chief Parliamentary Council finalizes that boundary, we will be coming to the stakeholders in that area as well to deal then with the matter of the internal boundaries. Bearing in mind that all these boundaries were predetermined in the 2000 Access Report, we as Coastal have stuck with those same boundary lines and demarcations, especially for the West Coast, which is a multi-use space, and have followed the general principle of the West Coast on the South Coast, where we're focusing primarily on conservation, reef replenishment and restoration, and reef fish habitat restoration. So that's what is going to be going on in those two areas.
Following up, Mr. Mark Thompson said, however, with details and more information, it may change the original thought of the physical development plan. Remember, he spoke to the connection between the physical development plan and the coastal zone management plan earlier. Anyone would like to say if it will change the original thought of the physical development plan?
If what will change the thought?
The information I presented in this coastal zone management plan.
If I may, the physical development plan has been recently amended to include the language of disaster risk management and climate change adaptation, which places the physical development plan in synchrony from a policy perspective with the plan here that we're now developing to do the very thing, which would be the mainstream disaster risk management and climate change adaptation into the whole planning and management process. So I would say that thought process has already occurred, so to speak, in terms of having both plans in synchrony in terms of the advancement of management efforts for those two areas that I mentioned, and I think that is my contribution towards that particular question. Thank you.
Perhaps we can get some clarification for, I see Mr. Leach is here. I know they were doing some amendments to the plan. If he can give us some clarification on the status of the plan, because we're at two different stages in our plan. So he could probably tell us where that plan is at. Mr. Leach.
Does he have
Can you open the mic?
Okay, fine. Just gonna ask if he has privilege to talk.
Can you please open the mic for Trevor Leach, if it is possible? In fact, I don't see him anymore.
Yeah, he's there. I see the mic.
Okay, open the mic for Trevor Leach for me, please.
Yeah.
It's open.
I still see it closed. Trevor, if you can unmute it, I don't know.
Okay, Alison, while they're waiting,
Mr. Leach, you have to unmute now. You have the microphone, you have to unmute. In the meantime, Antonio, you want to add something?
Just very quickly, because for Mr. Thompson's benefit, because there are a number of other plans, the tourism master plan and so on, and all these plans actually have included the same disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation. So it is a theme that's going through all the different plans right now in government. So there is some harmony in terms of the inclusion of the two policies that are featured now in our document. So I wouldn't be too concerned about these big major changes that may be, at least that one may think might occur, because we've been putting these things to the forefront right through the whole government. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonio. Dr. Aline wants to add some more comments to this question, which was asked. Dr. Aline, go right ahead.
Yes, just wanted to confirm that when the physical development plan was revised, the coastal zone management plan had already also was in thought and started, and there are lots of direct references to the plan when it comes on stream. So it was already taken into consideration in the physical development plan.
Thank you very much.
Alison?
Yes, go right ahead, Mr. Leach.
Just to follow up Dr. Aline's comments, I had to change mics. Just to make reference to follow up to Dr. Aline's comments, and to buttress that by saying that the legislation itself, that is even the current Town and Country Planning Act, Cap 240, as well as the emergent planning legislation, makes specific reference for the department to take into consideration the integrated coastal zone management plan. So even in instances where there may be, of course, delays in terms of updating one plan versus the other, to the extent that the legislation, the main legislation, provides specific reference to it and a specific requirement to take that plan into consideration, that the assessments in relation to the current integrated coastal zone management plan will always be applicable, because the legislation does enable that consultation and collaborative process.
Thank you very much for that clarification, Mr. Leach. And now we have two last questions before we close. And one person says, this question should be asked at the end of the meeting. The draft plan contains a lot of data and information. There is much to assimilate, which cannot be done in an online meeting. What are the next steps? What are the next steps? I think I can take this on. We are under our act. We were bound to conduct a public inquiry into this draft plan, as well as the boundaries of the coastal zone management area. We decided to have the meeting based on the sub areas, which are different geomorphologically. So this is the 7th of 8 meetings in order to disseminate information about the plan. We have put the plan on our website. We have placed the plan in all public libraries. We have disseminated information on some poster boards at beaches around the island. And we have done some videos. We have done a lot of public consultation on the plan and the boundaries of the coastal zone management area. We are thinking that we could not have done the in-person meetings because obviously of the situation with COVID-19. Initially, we wanted to go to community centers to speak to the public, but we could not have done that based on the COVID-19 situation. So we had to resort and come up with Plan B, which is do an online public inquiry. So the next step for us is that we will close the the comments very shortly. The comments, we had an inquiry or comment page on our website, and we asked the public to submit their comments. So we will close that very shortly at the end of our last meeting on Thursday. So the document has been out there for a while. We've had it out there for over 2 months now, and we've been asking for comments continuously. So our next step is, based on the comments which we have, we will amend the plan as necessary and submit to the minister, along with the report of the public inquiry from the chairperson to the minister for approval. I hope we'll be able to answer your question. So if you need to, go back and look at the plan and submit your comments, your queries as a matter of urgency. Chairman, please go ahead and add to my comments, please.
Yes, I want to add to that, Alison, just to inform that is my role, to listen very carefully to all the comments, all the feedback, and then give recommendations on how the plan can be improved for us to use it as a management tool. So the next step is to collate all of that information, draw upon it, see what is relevant in terms of any changes to strengthen the document, to strengthen the tool, the management tool, and then make recommendations on behalf of all those of you who have participated now, all those who are online have given the feedback necessary. So that's the next step.
Yes, we take all your comments very seriously, because we understand that we are all beach users in some form or fashion. We live along the beach, we recreate along the beaches, we go in the water, we fish. So we are well aware that everybody has a vested interest in our coastline. So we will not take any comments lightly, and those will be considered as we seek to make the plan the best plan possible for Barbados over the next 10 years or so. I don't see any more questions at this point in time. So therefore, I will pass it over to Jonathan, who will do the final polls for this session. Jonathan.
Thank you, Alison, and thank you for all attendees for this evening's excellent debate. We've got two final questions which actually bring together this whole discussion. We'd quite like your quick views. The first question relates to how highly would you rate the intentions of this updated ICZM plan? And you've heard very strongly the messages from the panel with regard to the focus on delivering a more risk resilient nature. So what would your perspective be as from what you've heard or what you've read? Do you think the intentions of this updated plan are poor, fair, good, very good, or excellent? And I'm pleased to see that we've got very good and excellent from what you've heard or what you've read. So thank you for that. And bringing this forward to my final question, it's linking to the updated plan, the policies and the actions that you've heard about or you've read. Do they make you feel more confident that future management of this sub-area 7, Bridgetown down to Carlisle Bay, would be more resilient, make communities more resilient to climate change and disasters in the future? How much do you agree with that statement? Do you strongly disagree or do you strongly agree? This, again, from all the 8 sub-areas, it gives us a flavour as to whether we're striking the right chord at a national level. And the results, again, are giving a strong perspective that we seem to be hitting the right chord. But as the chairman said, we'll be taking on board all these questions to see how we can fine tune and improve the message that's presented. So from myself, thank you very much for your time. And I'll pass over to the Deputy Director, who will give his final comments.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, Alison, panelists, ladies and gentlemen. thank you very much for coming to the public inquiry tonight for area 7. We've now reached a conclusion, and we really like to thank you for your participation. Thank you for all the comments. They've been very insightful, give us a bit to think about. And now that we have imparted our information on you, we would like you to try and go back and have another look at the plan if you haven't seen it before, or if you have, just take another look anywhere and see if we have inspired any more thoughts that you can write us and give us some more comments. You can do so at our website, which is www.coastal.gov.bb, or you can get to us through our WhatsApp number, which is 256-3173. So thank you very much again. I have to tell you that when we sign off here, there's an exit poll that comes out that we would really like you to answer for us, please. So don't just close off the mic when we're gone. So I would like to wish you all good night. Stay safe. Please answer the exit poll as we are exiting. I'm not sure if the moderator has anything else to say.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I'd like to just summarize the robust discussion we had this evening. We dealt with flood inundation and the climate change adaptation setbacks. We looked at how we use setback as a tool for development. We looked at our connections to the physical development plan. We also looked at our Carlisle Bay and Folkestone Marine Park areas. And we also discussed what are the next steps. I ask that I want to emphasize, you go back and look at the plan and see if there are any other issues that you would like to bring to our attention, any comments, any queries. Feel free to look at our website, our WhatsApp number. We have them all on our website. We look forward to seeing you on Thursday, which is our last online meeting. That is Thursday at 6 p.m. where we'll be discussing Needham's Point to South Point. That's another critical area of Barbados that we have to look at. So I look forward to seeing you. Be safe, and thank you very much for a wonderful evening. Good night.